Another edition of Behind the Lines presented by TheLines.com and BetMGM Sportsbook. I'm Eli Hershkovich, joined as always by Christian Cipollini, trading manager at BetMGM. Christian, playoffs are here. Favorites are hot going in, but hopefully that calms down a bit for not only myself, but for the book.
Yeah, it was definitely a tough year of favorites, although Week 18 was a good one for the book, best of the entire season. So the book is for sure hoping to keep that rolling.
Couple big dogs cashing, including the Saints and the Bears, despite the Packers and Bucks obviously getting into the playoffs. So I mentioned, or you hit on it, the historic season, favorites cashing in at the best rate since 2017 against the spread. And since that same year, the 2017 season, underdogs are actually 52 and 34 against the spread in the playoffs. So a pretty high ROI, return on investment. If we look at the underdogs for Wildcard Weekend, the Texans are +3, -115. Pittsburgh all the way up to +10 on Saturday night in Baltimore. Denver right around that number, +9 in Buffalo. Green Bay +4.5 at Philadelphia. Washington at the key number of a field goal in Tampa Bay. And then LA, a home dog to the Minnesota Vikings to wrap up Wild Card Weekend on Monday night. Which of those underdogs to you, or I guess looking at the handle tickets so far, has received the most interest?
Yeah, I'd say from a sharp perspective, the team that's gotten the most from the underdog perspective is the Rams. That line was around 2.5, somewhere around 3, down to 1.5 to the Vikings at this point. So the only home dog of the week is the one that was taking some action. The other one that at least we're getting public-wise 50-50 action on would be the Commanders. That's a game where we've seen just a little bit more Commanders money. Outside of that, we actually have done a pretty good job so far of it. I guess the numbers are pretty right because from what I've been looking at, we've taken a decent amount of two-way action, which isn't always the case, especially early on, especially when you got a couple games here with spreads of nearing double digits too.
I thought you would at least say Pittsburgh among one of those games, just because you say it every week. Pittsburgh is usually one of the more popular sides, whether it's as a dog or as a favorite at BetMGM.
Yeah, so that is usually the case, but I'm, for whatever reason, looking at what we have so far, when we were at 9.5 to the Ravens, we got way more Ravens money, and somewhat recently we've moved to the Steelers at +10. At that 10, we've taken a little more Steelers money, but it's more of like the sharps just kind of hitting that key number of 10. But from a public and more of the money we've gotten so far, it has been Ravens. But yeah, that is not common for us.
Pittsburgh coming into the playoffs on a 4-game losing streak. Russell Wilson has really, I guess, played below expectation. 31st in EPA, adjusted EPA per dropback. So Steelers offense struggling, averaging around 14 points per game during this losing streak. But to you, Christian, looking at the odds board, which line do you think is the most inflated?
It's that one that we're talking about right there. Main reason that I'll use that one is the most inflated, in my opinion, is it's a divisional game. They play a lot to cold weather teams playing cold. There's also going to be some potential weather coming up. So I would think that one's a little bit inflated. I would see it coming back a little towards Pittsburgh, although I don't know if that will be the case. The rest of these, I do feel like they are in pretty good spot. That 9 on the Bills is coming down a little bit. There are some 8.5s coming around. And obviously Denver looked very good playing Kansas City's backups last week. So that's probably playing a little bit of role into what we're seeing with that number.
What about Texans Chargers? Houston, another home dog, +3, -115. So the Chargers favored by a field goal, depending on how you look at the VIG. And LA has really struggled. To me, this is maybe on the surface, you wouldn't say the most inflated, but I have some reasoning behind why I like Houston. What do the bettors say so far at BetMGM?
Yeah, so far we have taken a good amount of Chargers action, more so than the Texans. I definitely can see. I would say going into the season, if you were to say this matchup, you would have certainly had it Texans -3, potentially even higher before the season. But as you kind of alluded to there, they haven't played well as of late. Um, and yeah, that's how they end up with the home dog -3 at this point. So far the public is back in the Chargers, but interesting to hear what you have to say about the Texans there.
Yeah, to me, so you look at the Chargers, 10-1 against non-playoff teams, and they don't have a win against a single playoff team this season. They rely on their ground game. We touched on that in a couple of different handicaps, especially as it relates to betting the under when the Chargers are involved. But Houston has one of the best run defenses in the NFL, second best run stop win rate across the entire league, and they also have the 11th highest pressure rate. And Justin Herbert really struggles under pressure when you look at EPA per dropback. So you're banking on Houston having somewhat of a competent offense. CJ Stroud has also underperformed expectations this season by a wide margin, but I'll take Houston in this defense to take the Chargers offense out of rhythm and Stroud to do just enough, even though Houston's wide receiver corps is banged up with Nico Collins, or they have Nico Collins on the field, but no Stephon Diggs, no Tank Dell. Can I get you there on Houston, or you sticking with Pittsburgh as your lone dog?
I definitely can see where you're going with that. Those more advanced metrics certainly are more eye-opening than what we've seen on the field as of late. So I'm more so on your side now than I was 5 minutes ago.
Fair enough. Also worth noting, too, the Chargers playing in their third straight road game. And historically, it is a minus EV bet when you have a team on the road 3 straight games, let alone a favorite in that position. So worth noting, depending on how you gauge any sort of negative variance toward the road team in this situation in a travel spot. Really difficult, especially with the playoffs on the line. But arguably the most intriguing game on the slate, Christian, Philadelphia hosting Green Bay. The Eagles are 4.5-point home favorites, total of 45.5. Jalen Hurts, 2-0 straight up in his career against Matt LaFleur and beating the Packers in week 1 and covering the short spread in the season opener in Brazil. Saquon Barkley had a huge game in the season opener for Philadelphia, 132 yards, total yards, yards from scrimmage on the ground with 3 touchdowns. But Jalen Hurts still in concussion protocol as we record here on Tuesday, about 5 days out from Sunday's kick. So how is the market swayed here? Because Philadelphia did open as low as 3.5, and there has been some action both ways, even though this is settling in at Philadelphia -4.5 now.
Yeah, so as you said, open at 3.5, went all the way up to 5.5. Schefter tweeted that he was still in concussion protocol. That dropped back down to 4, and now we're sitting at 4.5. So the expectation is that Hurts is going to play. Green Bay's got a couple injuries too. I'm not sure if Christian Watson moved it half a point or so in one direction or other. This is definitely the one that's had the most movement. As of now, we've seen more Eagles action from the books perspective. But yeah, intriguing for sure. As I think it's definitely the best game on paper this week.
And I'm assuming Philadelphia a pretty big liability, especially early in the week, granted. But when you look at moneyline parlays and the like.
Yeah, I'm sure they will be. Obviously, it's early, and we end up taking a little bit more mixed action because we'll get more sharp action as opposed to the homer favorites. Eagles have been a popular team throughout. I'd imagine we will certainly be rooting for the Packers in this one. And there is, I guess, a general trend of the favorites tend to win on Wildcard Weekend. Whatever it may be. So I imagine we'll have a ton of people just basically parlaying all the favorites or a good amount of the favorites. So we'll definitely want a couple to get beat.
What about prop bets? Saquon Barkley, always a popular pick, whether it's anytime touchdown odds or just rushing yards, total yards in general. Any player props stand out early in the week so far, whether it's for Eagles, Packers, or anywhere else on the board?
Yeah, so you mentioned Saquon. The one game that I was looking at was Eagles-Packers also. Saquon, you name it, on his rushing props, every one of them we've been hit on the over so far. But one that was a little interesting to me that I did see that was one of our more bet-on props was Josh Jacobs over 17.5 receiving yards. So I'm not sure what the angle was there, but I just did find that one interesting, that we had a good amount of over bets there.
Has it gotten bet up since then, or still sitting at 17.5?
Yeah, right. We were a little bit lower at 15.5, and it got bet up to 17.5. We were still taking bets on 17.5. So definitely something I'm missing there. I need to go do some research to see why people like that one.
And anything else for you, whether you're tailing Jacobs on the receiving yards prop or taking another point spread, what else stands out to you wildcard weekend?
Yeah, this is definitely an interesting one. I think I'm going to end up leaning more towards the Buccaneers -3. I'm always a little bit worried going against the Commanders because Jaden Daniels can he's so electric with his legs. They can have him stopped on a third down or a fourth down, and he just escapes and ends up finding it. But I do think that Tampa is the better team there, and I do think that they'll end up winning. I think I'm also going to probably lean on the Eagles, even though I'm not sure if that's the correct move there. I just do think that they're a better team. I do think Jair Alexander injury is going to end up being pretty significant, and they just really control the clock well. So especially at home, so I think I'm going to go with an edge there.
Yeah, we saw that on their final offensive possession going all the way back to week 1 against Green Bay, essentially draining the clock and winning that one or they were up, but icing it and making it insurmountable deficit for Green Bay, needing a touchdown with less than 30 seconds, no timeouts, a situation similar to that. As you all know by now, we've teamed up with BetMGM this season. We'll be using BetMGM lines to make all of our picks, and we'll have special offers for our listeners each week. If you haven't signed up with BetMGM yet, use promo code THELINES, that's the lines one word, and you will get up to a $1,500 first bet offer on your first wager with BetMGM. Here's how it works. Download the BetMGM app and sign up using bonus code THELINES. Deposit at least $10 and place your first wager on any game. You'll then receive up to $1,500 in bonus bets if your first bet loses. Just make sure to use bonus code THELINES when you sign up. See BetMGM.com for terms. 21 plus only. U.S. promotional offers not available in New York, Nevada, Ontario, or Puerto Rico. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Available in the U.S. Call 8778-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY 467-369 in New York. Call 1-800-NEXT-STEP in Arizona, 1-800-327-5050 in Massachusetts, 1-800-BETS-OFF in Iowa, and 1-800-981-0023 in Puerto Rico. First bet offer for new customers only, subject to eligibility requirements. Rewards are non-withdrawable bonus bets that expire within 7 days. In partnership with Kansas Crossing Casino and Hotel. Don't forget, if you haven't signed up for BetMGM yet, use bonus code THELINES and get your $1,500 first bet offer today. So, looking at down the road for Super Bowl futures, I want to talk about a couple long shots here in a second, but always interested in seeing where the book is at when it comes to Super Bowl finalists and potential matchups for the big game. Chiefs-Lions has the best odds at plus 380, followed by the Bills and the Lions, along with the Ravens and the Lions. Both of those potential Super Bowl matchups lined at plus 800. So have any notable bets come in, whether it's throughout the course of the season? Because I think that market is pretty consistently up at BetMGM over the 18-week regular season, or in recent days, have any significant or notable wagers come in on this market?
Yeah, so we do keep this market up all year. And as you've mentioned, the three biggest favorites are Chiefs, Lions, Ravens, Lions, Bills, Lions. Those three are three biggest in liability. We've taken consistent bets throughout all season long. Like I've mentioned all season long on this pod, the Lions have been the public darling and the most bet on team that we've had. So they're our biggest liability when it comes to regular Super Bowl odds. But I guess some of the people that we're starting to see the Lions at plus 350 and kind of not as good odds decided to try their hand in name the finalist, especially because the AFC side does feel pretty top heavy. It does feel like it'll be those, more likely than not, it'll probably be one of those three teams that ends up coming out of the AFC. So the one that we want to avoid the most is actually Ravens Lions. Then Chiefs Lions is the next one. So if it's going to be the Lions, we're going to hope it's the Bills. Otherwise, we won't be thrilled with that market. The one that's the most bet, though, is Chiefs Lions, but that has been towards the top of the favorite list throughout this season. So helped us a little bit.
Detroit plus 275 to win the Super Bowl. The shortest price in the market, Kansas City right behind him, followed by Baltimore and Buffalo. So that correlates with the most action when it comes to exact matchups. But entering Wildcard Weekend, even though Detroit and Kansas City have a bye, have they still been the two most popular picks as of recent days? So bets that have come in maybe since Sunday night. Any takers on the Bucks, maybe at 30-1. The Chargers also at that number. Biggest price in the market, Houston and Pittsburgh at 100-1. Anything stand out when it comes to the most recent Super Bowl futures bets?
Yeah, so we're still really top heavy in the action that we've taken. Those teams would be the Lions, Chiefs, Ravens, Bills, Eagles. Those 5 teams are the ones, at least from a betting perspective, statistical percentage, those are more likely than not we're going to see 1 or maybe 2 of those teams in the Super Bowl. Those are the teams that we really give a very good chance to winning it. And those 5 teams are by far our most bet on of those. Outside of that, we did end up with a little bit of Buccaneers action as we've gotten closer. We actually saw a little bit of Broncos action too, some stemming off their big win, and just off the fact that you're getting them at a pretty good price. So it doesn't take a big bet to end up with a decent sized ticket. So we did end up taking a little bit more than we've taken throughout the season. But outside of that, we've taken a little bets on some of these dogs, but for the most part, they're taking those 5 teams that I mentioned a minute ago.
Denver, not really a team we discussed so much on the podcast, but 80-1 at BetMGM and around +9, and maybe we see this get shaved down to 8.5, which I'm assuming then will become a pretty big teaser liability. With Buffalo, I'm talking about teasing them below the key number of a field goal. But speaking of the Broncos, if we look at Super Bowl long shots here to wrap it up, Christian, ahead of the Wildcard Weekend, Denver entered the season right around +150, Washington +150, and Minnesota 100-1. And we've seen long shots not only get to the big game sparingly, but still has happened. Cincinnati, Joe Burrow and the Bengals lost in a heartbreaker to the Rams a few years ago, and Matthew Stafford. And then going back to 1999, speaking of the LA Rams, Kurt Warner and Los Angeles took down Steve McNair, the late Steve McNair, and the Tennessee Titans to win the Super Bowl. And they were around 100-1 entering that season. So I mentioned the long shots coming into the year, dating back to the preseason. You said some action is coming on Denver, but are the Broncos among those 3 long shots, Denver, Washington, and Minnesota, the biggest liability, or is it Minnesota just because of their pretty much red hot regular season outside of the finale losing to Detroit?
Yeah, so from a liability standpoint, the only team that we're really still sweating is the Lions. Like we've ended up taking so much more action on the Lions that even the people that had got Minnesota at 50-1, whatever great price they ended up getting earlier in the season hasn't been enough to give us liability. A current team that we have as the biggest long shot is the Steelers. As we mentioned, that's another team that we have liability on. But outside of that, we're actually okay with a good amount of these teams. The ones of these long shots we wouldn't want, just because it would end up being a lesser win for us, would be the Broncos, and then the Commanders as well. So kind of similar to what you talked about. Those were teams going into the season that were really, really big long shots, and that have come in significantly throughout the season. So any hometown fans got great numbers on those, and they're just hoping the team can keep going.
He is Christian Cipollini, trading manager at BetMGM Sportsbook. Always fantastic information, especially heading into Wildcard Weekend. Thank you, as always, for watching and listening to this edition of Behind the Lines. I'm Eli Hershkovich. This episode always presented by BetMGM and TheLines.com. So long, everybody, and good luck with your Wildcard Weekend bets.